Hello, comparative religions. And this week we are getting into our first look at actual religion. We've kind of done the background, we've looked at what God is, we've looked at how you can study religion, why you should study religion, that sort of thing. But now we're actually going to get into specific belief systems. And this week we have two lessons on Mesopotamia. And we start with Mesopotamia because many people believe this is the birthplace of civilization. So it would make sense that this would also kind of be the birthplace of religion. All right. So, two lessons. This first lesson is going to go into some of the political background of Mesopotamia, and we'll talk about some of the gods and goddesses in Mesopotamia. The second lesson will deal specifically with religious practices. Okay. As we go through, I will try to tell you exactly what to copy down so that you can get your own notes down as we move through these two lessons. All right. So here is Mesopotamia. This is the region that we are talking about. All right. You can see over here, here's Egypt. All right. Some of the big city states that we're going to mention are Sumer, Babylonia, and Assyria. All right. And each one of these is going to play a key role in the development of not only civilization in Mesopotamia, but also religion in Mesopotamia. Now, the first Mesopotamian civilization that we come across, and I do want you to get these two things down. The first Mesopotamian civilization we come across are the Sumerians, okay? They're out of Sumer. The Sumerians came from the southern region of modern Iraq, and they are given credit for creating the world's first cities. Okay, so if you believe that Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization, here's where we get the idea of cities. All right, they are eventually conquered by the Akkadians. Okay, and the Akkadians, their first great ruler was King Sargon. And there are a bunch of legends, there are a bunch of stories about Sargon. And in these legends and these stories, we find elements from stories we find in other belief systems, okay, including the element of the exposed child. And we see that in the story of Moses. We see it in the story of Oedipus, and we're going to see it in the story of Romulus and Remus, who are given credit for founding Rome. Okay, now do not worry about copying anything down on the next slide. But here is part of the story of King Sargon. Okay, Sargon, the mighty king, king of Agad, am I. My mother was a changeling. Now, notice there's a question mark there. Not quite sure what that means. Okay, it could possibly mean that his mother was some sort of mythical creature who took the form of a female and seduced his father and conceived Sargon. Okay, so that Sargon is the offspring of this mystical combination. Okay, because my mother I knew not. I mean, my father I knew not. My changeling mother conceived me in secret. She bore me. She set me in a basket of rushes. With bitumen she sealed my lid. She cast me into the river, which rose not over me. The river bore me up and carried me to a key, the drawer of water. A key, the drawer of water, lifted me up. A key, the drawer of water, took me as his son and reared me. Okay. In that last part of the story, we definitely see elements of the story of Moses because Moses' mother put him in a basket and sent him down the Nile River. And of course, he is drawn out by Pharaoh's daughter. All right. So there are similar elements in the story of Sargon with stories that we find in other religions, especially this element of the exposed child. Now, the Akkadians are eventually conquered by the Babylonians. And the key ruler for the Babylonians is King Hammurabi. King Hammurabi was the first to unite all of Mesopotamia under one rule because there's a bunch of city states in Mesopotamia. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. King Hammurabi is able to unite them under him. He also created the world's first legal code. And that is very, very important. And be sure you get these things down. That is very, very important because under his code, the weak are protected, justice is extended to orphans and widows, and you get an eye for an eye mentality. So in Hammurabi's code, we find not only a lot of creeds and a lot of laws and protection that we're going to find in other religious beliefs, but we also find a lot of concepts that we're going to find in later legal systems, okay? Namely, that the weak are going to be protected and that the orphans and widows get justice in court, okay? Other civilizations were not extending those same protections. So Hammurabi's code is a very, very unique change in the way civilization is headed, okay? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, also in Hammurabi's code is the idea that you are innocent until proven guilty. All right, a lot of civilizations you were judged guilty and had to be proven innocent, but I think Hammurabi is the first to say you are innocent until proven guilty. Now, after the Babylonians come the Assyrians, okay? They are very, very militaristic. They have a very, very short rule because of their harsh rule. All right. They do not last long, and be sure you get these two things down. They do not last long because they are very, very cruel. In fact, there is a key root in the word Assyrians, the fact that they are asses. All right. They are known as asses throughout history because they are so militaristic and they are cruel and harsh. And when you are cruel and harsh, and even though you might be a good conqueror, when you are cruel and harsh, it is very, very difficult to keep the territory that you conquer. All right. People do not feel the love that they would maybe a more gentler group of people. So people are always looking to overthrow you, which is why their rule is short lived. Okay. Then, last but not least, we get the Persians. The Persians had the largest Mesopotamian empire, and they will be eventually defeated by Alexander the Great. Okay, but they have the largest empire until Alexander the Great comes along. All right, so that's some of the politics, some of the history related to Mesopotamia. I will go on and give you a heads up when we get ready for the quiz. You're going to have to know each one of these empires and what they are known for. Okay, you need to know the Babylonians and Hammurabi. You need to know militaristic Assyrians. You need to know largest empire, the Persians. Okay, first cities created by the Sumerians, and then King Sargon and the Akkadians. Now, this history impacts the Mesopotamian religion. And what we're going to look at, the last part of this, is Mesopotamian deities. Now, originally, Mesopotamian religion is naturalistic polytheism. Okay, there are all these natural forces out there in the universe. Now, what's interesting is those naturalistic forces are considered laws instituted by gods and goddesses. Okay, and again, be sure you're copying these things down. Now, how this all ties together is eventually those gods and goddesses become more pronounced. Each one of those empires we talked about, each one of the cities that those empires found or those empires conquer has its own deity. Okay? So we begin with naturalistic polytheism. Over time, those gods and goddesses become more pronounced. Each of the cities in Mesopotamia is going to have its own god or goddess, which makes this one of the most detailed polytheistic religions out there because there were over 2,000 plus meso-deities. That being said, it is very, very difficult to keep up with them all. And since the deity was responsible for the destiny of the city, oftentimes the deity changed, okay? If a war occurred and your city got conquered, like let's say your city got conquered by the Assyrians, then the deity might change, okay? Because the original deity of the city was conquered, the city lost, so that deity goes away, all right? So it's very, very complex in the number of deities and who they are and where they are, okay? A lot of uncertainty, a lot of change. Also, these deities, and we're going to see this in Greece and Rome as well, these deities are human in nature. In fact, they are considered the immortal models for humans, okay? It would make sense that the gods and goddesses look like humans. They are models for us, but they are immortal, all right? So beginning as naturalistic polytheism, eventually those gods and goddesses become more pronounced. There was a bunch of them out there, and they look like humans. All right. Now, I just want to list a couple of the big ones. All right. A couple of the big ones here. You have Anu, who is the sky god. He's the king of all gods. Okay. And the god of Uruk. All right. We're going to talk about him in a few minutes. Oh, actually, we'll talk about him in the next lesson. Enlil, or Bel, is the air god, the lord of wind and storm. He is the chief deity of the city of Nippur. And Nana, the moon god, is the chief deity of the city of Ur. Okay, now what's interesting about the city of Ur is going to have connections to the biblical figure of Abraham. Okay, because Abraham was from Ur. And of course, then God calls Abraham and sets him apart, and we begin to see the beginnings of Judaism and Christianity and Islam based on this figure of Abraham. So these are just three of the main Mesopotamian deities: Anu, the sky god; Enlil, the air god; and then Nana, the moon god. Okay. Now, the city gods, all right, and this is a map that just shows you a couple of the key cities. There's Ur right there, okay, there's Ur down there, there's Uruk right there, all right, but those are some of the cities, and keep in mind, each one of those cities would have its own deity, all right. When it came to the specific cities, all right, be sure you get these down. The rulers of the city were considered God's representative. Okay, God placed them there. What's interesting is that the rulers often played the role of priest because the ruler's task was to interpret God's mandates. All right. So even though they were the political leader, they also kind of were the religious leader because they had to interpret the mandates of gods. All natural forces, and we see this from the early stages of the naturalistic polytheism, all natural forces were attributed to the gods and dictated by the gods. Temples were built to house the gods as well as temples for family members, okay, and temples for God's representative in the city. All right. And as I said before, political change could result in the change of a ruling god because the destiny of the city was determined by the god. If the gods changed, if the city was defeated or the city was conquered, obviously the gods are going to change. Okay. And that's how that was explained. It was the will of the gods. Okay. So this is a little bit about the gods in each city. Rulers were interpreted as the gods' representatives. Their task was to interpret the will of the gods. Of course, all natural forces are dictated by the gods. We see that with naturalistic polytheism. And we have the construction of temples not only for the gods, but for their family members, including the representative on earth. Now, that's it for this first lesson, okay, where we're headed now that you kind of understand a little bit about the politics and the history of Mesopotamia, you understand where we are in terms of moving from naturalistic polytheism to polytheism of over 200 or 2,000 plus gods, and you understand the politics and how the politics interact with the religion. Now we're going to look at some more specific religious beliefs and some specific religious practices in the second lesson.